We're looking at an HTML template page that has the primary navigation and the secondary navigation that's planned for the site. We're getting that information from a sitemap. So we can now see that our primary navigation up here, while it doesn't look like much, allows for a home page, a portfolio, a resume, a contact, and a PDF resume. And that likewise, while our footer isn't necessarily all that attractive, there is a footer that has a link to a sitemap, mobile wireframe, desktop wireframe, both HTML and CSS validation, which are in different order, but that's okay, and a style guide page. So now we're going to build out the body of the page. So every page on a website needs certain content for the body. At least there are some that are necessary and some that are just best practices. We're going to go over that now. So now within my body element, I've got my header and my footer, so now the last thing for me to do is to build out the content for the main element, which is the main content. Now on any page, really what we have here would be a great template, because this is the stuff that actually needs to be the exact same on every single page. But we're going to put some stuff in the main element that just gives us some best practices. But really, the stuff that's in the main element is the stuff that should be different on every page. This is the whole reason to have a new page, that we want a different content. But for now, we're going to build some placeholder stuff that we can update for each page. The first thing is going to be an H1 element. It is the first child of main. It should always be the first child of main. And we're going to put some placeholder text in here that says every page needs to have an H1 element that summarizes the main idea of the page. And that's true. Every page does need to have an H1 element, and it should summarize the main idea of the page. Okay, so then we're going to add underneath that the second level heading, which is an H2. And we're going to give it some placeholder content too. That says separate sections of content on the page with headings in sequential order. H2 comes after H1. What this means is that when we look at these in preview, what we're going to find is with just the default HTML styles applied to them, both H1s and H2s are kind of big. And so it's not unusual for folks when they're first starting out making web pages to want to start with H3 because it's the first one that doesn't feel absolutely ginormous. But we don't actually want to skip headings. We want to make sure that the first heading on our page is always an H1. And that if we need to separate the content on the page up beyond that, that we use H2s. And then if within content that falls under that H2, we want to separate up even further, then we use H3s. And we don't want to skip a number in that heading sequence. It's really important for our HTML markup to be correct, that we don't skip those heading orders. So let me show you what we're working with so far. Come and find our little page here. We can reload. And I guess I didn't save my changes. I'm not seeing anything yet. Let's try it. Yep, you see my little circle up here. I need to save. And reload. And now we see we've got our H1. And we've got our H2. And yes, they feel very big, but we still want to make sure that we use H1 and H2. And later we'll be able to determine how we want them to look using a different language called CSS. But for now, we just want to make sure that our markup is correct and establishes the correct hierarchy. So make sure that we do that. Okay, the next piece of text that our instructions are telling us to use is to have a paragraph element that appears underneath the H2. So I'm going to add a tag called P and make sure I close it. And then on its own line, I'm going to put in this content. I am copy pasting this from our assignment instructions. You are welcome to do that too, so that you don't have to write it all out, but we do want to read it. So this is all actually important stuff for you to know. It says people don't visit most websites for leisure reading. They come to get information. Successful websites make that as easy as possible. So what we're building here is a template that helps you learn how to write for the web, which is really important because people don't usually surf the web for, for leisure reading. Usually if you go to a website, you're looking for something specific. And you want to make sure if you are the person providing that website, the way to keep someone on your website is to make it as easy as possible for them to get to the information they're looking for. So the next thing we're going to add is an H3. So I'm going to open up my H3 tag, close my H3, and write the words tips for good web content. And now what we're going to do, since these things belong together, is we're actually going to organize these tips into a list. It's really important to use lists when things belong together. It helps the browser to understand that they belong together. So I'm going to open up an unordered list because these don't need to be in a specific order. And then I'm going to open up a set of list tags. And I'm going to put my first tip in there. The first tip that we are given is that when users read the headings H1 through H6 on your page, they should get the main idea of the page even if they don't read anything else. That is true. So what you really want to do is kind of the opposite of what you were taught to do in your high school English class when you wrote a thesis paper. And you had to start with introductory paragraph, and then you give 3 supporting paragraphs. You state your thesis in that introductory paragraph, and then your conclusion at the end. Really, the H1 should be your conclusion. And then your supporting paragraphs should be your H2s. Your H3s might involve your thesis, right? And then all the paragraph text is just if someone's interested enough to want to read more. Let's see. So our next tip, don't skip a heading number for the look. Headings need to be sequential. We just talked about that, so I won't elaborate. We'll go on to our next tip, which we've also already talked about. We're doing it right now, which is just that if you have a group of things, related things to communicate, make sure you organize them into a list because it's easier to read a list than a long paragraph. And people don't want to read a long paragraph. Our next tip, keep paragraphs short and to the point. Okay. We keep our paragraphs really short, to the point, and provide links to relevant content where necessary. Our next tip. Each page should end with a link to the next thing you want your users to do. This is called a call to action, or a CTA for short. And so what that means is at the bottom of every page, there should be a link that makes it really easy for the person visiting your site to go to the next thing you want them to go to. And we always want to have these. Calls to action are really important, especially for search marketing. So make sure that you have that. And now the last thing that we need, let's see, our last tip is related to those links. Links should be attached to anchor text that describes what the user will find if they visit the link. Avoid using generalizations like click here or link in favor of words that accurately describe the link. So in this case, that's what this is, this title attribute of view the sitemap for this website. That's part of it. But what we're actually talking about here is anchor text. So that's actually the text inside the anchor elements. And really, rather than click here to see sitemap, if this was in a complete sentence, view my sitemap or view the sitemap for this website would actually make better anchor text as well. So we want to avoid writing the words link or click here. You're going to get a lot of practice for this in my class by doing our written submissions for each assignment. Those written submissions always require you to give me a link to your website, and it should always be attached to text that says something about what I'm going to see if I click on it. So we'll get a lot of practice with that. So that finishes up our list, but we do have one more thing required on our main element, which is another paragraph element. All of this is inside main. These are all children of main. But our last item is to have a paragraph element that has this text of end every page with a call to action. A call to action is a sentence that tells the user what to do next and provides a link to the next page. So again, instead of click here to go to the next page, somewhere in this sentence should be some text that describes what is on the next page, and that text should be what's called the anchor text for the link. So in this case, if we were going to send somebody to the next page, right, a call to action is a sentence that tells the user what to do next, and I would probably put a link right here. Provides a link to the next page, for example. This is harder to do with placeholder text, but we'll make it clear. In this case, href would still be a placeholder because I don't have one yet, so I'd use a hashtag, a recursive link. And then title that says something like both title and anchor text should describe the content of the link. Okay, we can save that. And we can come back now to our website template that we're working on here. And reload the page. You should have a template that looks something like this. Again, it's really not much to look at, but HTML isn't about what it looks like. HTML is about describing the content on the page. We're going to worry about how it looks later. So just make sure that you're accurately describing it. So now we have pretty much our whole page. We've built it all out. This is the whole assignment. There's one last little piece of things that you need to do, and that's part 3 of the assignment instructions, which is just to validate your code. Let's talk about the validator because it can be a little tricky at first. But we have put a link in the footer to our validator, and it's there for a reason. It's going to help us to validate our code. Let's talk about that in a separate video, just because this one's getting a little bit long and it'll be easier for you to come back to if it's in a separate video. But we'll talk about validating our code from there.